All right, well, welcome everyone to Choices when going all electric with boilers, radiant, and renovations. This course is approved for 1 hour continuing education units, GBCI, AIBD, BPI, NonWholeHouse, as well as AIA, Health, Welfare, and Safety, which may make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. This course is brought to you by the nonprofit, the GreenHome Institute, and today I'll be your moderator. My name is Brett Little. The focus of this course today is just really looking at all the different things and choices we have before us when we're looking at going all electric, and then a little bit of a side into boilers and radiant and some of the emerging technologies that go there. And with that, a huge thanks to our top tier sponsor for this session, introducing the all new Rheem ProTerra, an energy efficient, quiet, and all electric hybrid heat pump water heater. The future of water heating is finally here. Anywhere from 40 up to 80 gallons. As you can see here, the efficiency goes up to over 300%, sometimes 400%, depending on the device, compared to just short of 100% on standard electric and 69% on standard gas. Significant savings, quiet warranties, leak detection, and works with home automation in some cases. If you don't know how these things work, you can see at the top there, air is pulled in and enters upper intake port, passes through the filter. Refrigerant absorbs the heat. Compressor pumps the heat to refrigerant to the condenser. Heat is transferred to the water in the tank, and condensate is routed away from the unit, and then hot water is given from there. These devices can be ducted in certain instances like garage or basements, and they can be chained together for multifamily apartments, which we'll talk to about a real case study with shortly. And again, they have technology built into your smartphone for your clients, leak detection, energy use tracking, modes and scheduling, which is very important for new incentives that are coming for time of use programs, where basically these water heaters can run when off-peak hours or low-peak hours are happening, and there could be savings. And so check with your utility and your client's utility to see if this is something that can make sense. And also thanks to our second tier sponsor, Water Furnace International. They have all-in-one hydronic split and combo units using ground source heat pump technology, some of the most efficient way to heat and cool and heat water on the planet. And you can see there are many different strategies to get heat out of the ground, whether you have a pond or whether you need to dig down deep, or whether you want to string it out. Go check them out over at Geothermal for All. All right, well, I want to hand it off to our speaker, Sean Armstrong. Sean has taught net zero design at a demonstration house at Humboldt State University from 1999 to 2002 and has 12,000 plus hours of experience as staff project manager with affordable housing developers, specific communities, Donko communities, and the redevelopment agency of the city of, I'm going to get that wrong maybe, but Arcata. Sean was the first developer to use the California Utility Allowance Calculator and is just a huge advocate for all electric design and helping us come up with new strategies to get there. So with that, Sean, thanks for joining us, and I am going to hand it over to you.
All right, thanks very much, Brett. So I'm going to show my screen. It'll be the PowerPoint. All right, now I'm going to bring it up on the big screen. Let's make sure this forwards. Do you see my slide? Oh, it says paused.
Looks like they got us again.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. So this is a photo of my brother jumping into his swimming pool. It's in Long Island, New York. It's got a nice big heat pump that also heats his hot tub. He's got a PV array up on the roof. It's a family affair here. That's anyway, my family there. So I'm going to talk about heat pump boilers. Talk about like higher temperature generally is the direction we're going to take this conversation. We're going to finish off with some home retrofit stuff. I encourage you to ask questions as you go along. My background is as a science teacher. So this is the demonstration house, and yeah, I no longer teach there, but I still actively mentor the co-directors, the 3 live-in housemates, and so they like farm at my wife's farm, and I go up there and teach classes just for them, history and such. So it's a really amazing house. It was invented back in 1978. It's part of Carter's program. There were hundreds of these demonstration houses across the country. All of them were canceled during the Reagan administration, except this one, because it's student funded. So it's an amazing place to get educated, the Campus Center for Appropriate Technology at Humboldt State University. So then I went off to become a sort of an activist science teacher, and my main lab was this illustration you can see here. This is how skin tanning works. People who are in northern latitudes pale in the wintertime so that they can make vitamin D. And people who are from areas where you have a darker base tan, if they move north, they get much paler in the winter also. Everyone does this. And then in the summertime, you tan in order to prevent the loss of vitamin B. So both of those vitamins, if you're pregnant and you have a deficiency, will kill the infant inside of you, unfortunately. Have really significant nervous system effects on yourself as well, bad for you. So this is a strong and the controlling genes of why you'll find people with the same skin tan in Sri Lanka as in the Aborigines of Australia, as in people who are in Central South America up in the mountains where they get the most sunshine, or in Central Africa. And it has nothing to do with any biological relationship. It's we all independently adapt to our climates. You can see a very pale skin up here in Northern Europe here. This specific tanning variant developed just after the last ice age, and you can tell that because there's 500 years of broken bones in these Turkish farmers who moved up after the glacier retreated with very dark tans, base tans, and lack of vitamin D because they didn't pale in the wintertime. So I went from that to being an activist developer. And since 2005, I've been working in affordable housing. This is my coolest project yet. It's 11 stories tall. It'll be zero net energy. It's on the Washington, D.C. Beltway. It's under construction this year. 9-story tall vertical PV array facing the Beltway, 250,000 cars a year. I'm very excited to sort of kick off the future. We need to get all electric and solar powered buildings going here, and tons of batteries in there as well for grid balancing. So I've been working on bigger and bigger projects, and shifting everything to all electric. I don't take clients who are building with gas because it's really important, obviously, we address climate change now. My mother-in-law, by the way, died in one of those famous California fires, the first big one, the Tubbs Fire in 2017 in Santa Rosa, where she lived. So on a very personal level, I've been dealing with the impacts of climate change for a while now. So here, look, you can see how electricity emissions have been dropping precipitously for about the last 20 years, 15, probably better to say, and they keep on going down. It's not that our demand is going down, it's that we're adding so much renewable energy to the grid, which is the cheapest grid electricity right now. Since 2019, now every year, the majority, like 60% plus, of the power plants being proposed and then built in the United States are renewable energy. It's already the majority, the super majority, the filibuster-proof majority of power plants are renewable energy, and it's only growing faster because it's wind and solar are the cheapest plants to put up. Where should you be installing heat pump water heaters as opposed to electric resistance? Everywhere. Doesn't matter what grid mix you have. Even if you are 100%, or like, West Virginia, that's about a 95% coal power grid mix. There's a few states like that in the United States that are almost all fossil fuels. And because the direct burning of fossil fuels is at best 97% efficient, and a heat pump over the course of the year is in the range of 300% efficient, you still produce a little bit less pollution if you're using a heat pump on straight fossil fuels making the electricity. That's just how the math works. So those are not ideal states, but they're better to electrify than burn any fossil fuels in any context. And then, of course, as you get into states that have deeper grid penetration of renewables, then it just gets better and better.
Sean, you had mentioned comparing it to electric resistance, but of course, there's sort of the elephant in the room here of comparing it on where it should be installed in regards to considering gas. Can you comment on that briefly?
Oh yeah, this is comparing electric heat pumps to gas, this illustration. So electric resistance.
I see it now. Yep, I see the word gas.
Gotcha. And you know, gas and electricity, as you're pointing out, resistance are both in that 90, at best, 97% efficient. Right? Gas is in the range of 80% on average, but it starts at like 61% and goes up to 97. Anyway, there's just nothing that gas does at its best efficiency that a heat pump can't do better at sort of the worst end of its efficiency. And heat pumps, their efficiency goes from say 220% up to 760%, the best products that are out there. I mean, really remarkable. I'll show you some of the products as we get into this. So yeah, the whole United States, the whole world, even if it's 100% coal grid, should be using a decent heat pump to reduce air pollution, and use a really good heat pump if you want to make significant progress. So I'm gonna do like a little story time. I like this way of looking at heat pumps. Over here on the left-hand side, this is one of the first heat pumps ever. They started big. We've been able to build them smaller and smaller. Its first job was to chill beer. So you could think of it sort of as a water source heat pump. It was pulling heat out of the warm beer and chilling it. That was back in 1870. That was the largest brewery in the United States, Liebman and Sons in Brooklyn. That was the biggest brewery, and they were the first ones to innovate with using the compression cycle and refrigerants and electricity to pull heat, you know, to chill something and push heat someplace else. The next step up, in 1930s and 40s, Switzerland was not at war during World War II, and but it had very little access to fossil fuels. So they went on a dam building spree in the 30s, and it started in the 20s, but they really tried to isolate themselves energy-wise, an independent grid. And they had lots and lots of cheap electricity because they had so many mountains with, you know, perfect dammable rivers. So they started making really big heat pumps, and they would heat their swimming pools to be in a warm swimming pool in the winter in Switzerland in the 1930s. Heating their city halls, etc. Just public buildings, basically, they put in these massive heat pumps because they still hadn't gotten them very small. In the 1930s is the first time we see a heat pump in someone's house or office. It was Carrier, the guy who had sort of commercialized heat pumps from 1900 to 1920 or so. And in the 1930s, he had like a personal reversible heat pump in his office, heating and cooling. So this is a real era of innovation, 1930s. Technology is getting better. Next step forward, from what I can find, is dairy chillers. So I'm from Wisconsin and grew up among all the dairy farms. My family were anomalies. They were vegetable farmers, and so we traded. That was terrific. Tomatoes for dairy and rabbit meat and such. Okay, so the Dairy Equipment Corporation, they made dairy chillers that resulted in hot water. Sorry, there's a typo there. Hot water, and stored it for washdown. You know, get out a hot hose, spray down everything, sterilize everything. Everything gets cleaned up. It's just part of maintaining a dairy. So they innovated then the first standalone heat pump water heater. They compressed all their big stuff and they turned it into, in 1978, like a little 80-gallon tank with a heat pump on top. It was noisy. It was, you know, a COP of 2.2, so it was a very minimum. Essentially, it's still the federal minimum. It's the same efficiency that we're pulling off in 1978. I have an earnest hope that the next 4 years will move forward on baseline efficiency because there's so far to go. We're ridiculous. If it was gas, it'd be the equivalent to being like 30% efficient as our federal minimum. We can go, you know, a lot farther than a 2.2. We can get it up to in the 6s. Technically, and right now, the products exist in Japan, the center of heat pump innovation at the moment. Okay, so 1970s, we get our first standalone heat pump water heater tank that I know of. And if anyone knows of an earlier one, let me know. And I just want to say it again, if you have any chat questions and such, please put them, I mean, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and Brett will interject, and I'd like to answer questions.
Well, there was one going back to, again, the statement on, you know, on grid appropriation. Yeah, you know, it does. Does the greenhouse gas reduction percent take into account the fact that power grid production is a 1/3 ratio or 1/4 ratio for input versus outlet production?
Yes, that's exactly right. So a fossil fuel plant at best can get to like 45, 50% efficiency right now. Gas plants or coal plants are less. That's about as good as a gas plant can get. So if it's, say, 40% efficient on average at getting the fuel into the grid, that's like burning a 40% efficient gas water heater in your house, right? Those are two same 40%. Although delivering the electricity is, there's a 10% loss, there's losses and such. But to answer your question simply, yes. If you look at how much fuel does it take in a house, how much fuel does it take out in the grid, knowing the efficiencies of each, so all that math being done carefully, and then you say, I'm using a heat pump though, I'm using this electricity in a way that collects heat from the environment. 1 unit of electricity in gets you 2 to 7 units out, depending upon the season, depending upon the heat pump, etc. So yeah, that's how this math is done. And this doesn't really capture the fact that methane leakage, which is about 3% with all of the natural gas that's delivered. So you don't get 3% of the methane that was dug out of the ground for your burning device. And that 3% in climate change impact is equal to the combustion of the other 97%. So this graphic doesn't even double the impact of methane use. This is just a straightforward non-leakage based analysis. If we included the impact of methane leakage, everything here would be the dark blue. So it's a very conservative estimate, to be clear. It is much worse than this even indicates.
And what's really, I'm putting in the chat for everyone, I saw NRDC released a report in December. I just saw it today about gas leaks and the leaks throughout the entire system. And I was fascinated by it. So anyway, I'm sharing it in the chat with you all.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Some of the worst gas leaks are in California. About 90% of all the gas that's in California is delivered all the way from Pennsylvania, physically all the way from Pennsylvania. And then once it gets into our cities, it leaks like a sieve. And my house almost blew up. I had a big leak in our front yard, and it is absolutely panic-inducing in 2017. It's like, don't throw a cigarette butt at our grass, you'll blow us up. And it lasted for 2 months. And so it's like the issue of leaks is significant at every step of the way. Any other questions on this?
No, thank you.
All right then. All right, beer brewing in Brooklyn. Swiss swimming pools, the Swiss swimming. I like the alliteration. Chilling our dairy. Okay, next important step forward. In 2001, the coal-based utility, it's coal and nuclear in Japan. It's pretty much it. They have coal, they burn it. They have nuclear power, they burn it. They don't have oil, natural gas supplies, all that kind of stuff is not really there. So their grid is very stable because you can't turn up and down coal plants or nuclear power plants. They just stay on. They just go. That's it. No variability to it. But there's a problem because human beings have a really big spike in energy consumption when you come home, cook a meal, turn on the lights because it's dark, get the house warm because it's getting cold, take a shower, etc. In Japan, they have a tradition of sitting tubs where you first clean off in a shower and then you get into 100 gallons plus, it's between like 50 and 150 gallons of hot water. And then people will, cycle through that huge tub of hot water, clean people, right, over the course of the evening, just for the hangout time, the quiet and the peace of having a nice tub. Totally get it. Used to do that in the snow in Wisconsin. Loved it outside. Just fill it up. So to solve this huge spike in energy consumption, though, from electric resistance turning on to do this work, because they didn't really have natural gas to deliver in most of Japan, then there was the solution, using a CO2 heat pump and innovating by adding a computer to it so that it had a quote-unquote inverter. An inverter is just a little computer that controls the device based upon the outside temperature, so it'll speed up the pump, speed up the motor, speed up the fan, speed everything up as it gets colder outside, so it can do the same amount of work of exposing cold liquid to, well, essentially even cold, but not as cold air, because it can be these things work down to -30 Fahrenheit. They just have to go faster. So those combined using CO2 as a refrigerant, which is a really good refrigerant for cold temperatures up to very hot temperatures. You know, it can go up to 150, 195. It can get really hot and do a big span. It has to work at really high pressures, though, so you'll never see a split system. They deliver the CO2 heat pump as a packaged unit. Don't touch it. Just take the hot water out, kind of thing. Very high pressure. So in 2001 is when we get EcoCutes, and it's a longer, it's an abbreviation in English of a very long phrase like carbon dioxide heat pump for environmental benefits. And they're like, okay, we're going to call it EcoCute. Then I think the next step forward is around 2012, when we started seeing products like the Stiebel Eltron heat pumps, the Arctic Space Pack, Mitsubishi's coming out with these heat pumps. These are air to water, and they have computers in them, so they can go to cold temperatures. And these are 2 to 6 tons, so they're appropriate for heating a house and the water. You know, like and there's many other brands. We're going to get into a bunch of this, just the examples that came out early. And they're good for hot tubs. They're good for swimming pools. You know, they'll take water up to about 130. There'll be really cold temperatures like -4, -15 that they'll be working well at, you know, and then they can get it up to about 130. So it's good for domestic hot water, and it's also good for radiant floors and such. You can get it up to 70 degrees, 80 degrees, 90 degrees. 2012, Colmac started selling big in Hawaii. I've had a lot of fun going. For a little while, they had published all their product, all the places they'd installed, and cracked me up. They were all over the world, and you know, all these companies are global. So just to be clear, and this one particularly, I got a list of all the places where they were at, and it was a lot of the boilers in the beachfront Hawaii condos. Now, these things are both hotels and condos, so condo buildings, so people own them, right, and they're time shared and all the rest of it. And they have electric boilers because Hawaii also doesn't have natural gas, and the law says you have to deliver it in a boat from the mainland. So they get a certain kind of fuel that is then reprocessed into something similar to methane, but isn't. And so it burns like methane in boilers, but it's expensive and not delivered very far. And lots of parts of Hawaii don't have any access to it. So essentially all the cool Hollywood movies from the 60s, like, you know, all the Elvis movies in Hawaii and such, they were all shot and filmed in buildings that were all electric, unless they were burning wood. That was how Hawaii was mostly built out as statehood began. And all the way up until essentially the 90s, there wasn't much natural gas anywhere. And even now, it's still just a spine through some of the most urbanized areas. So this is an example of an apartment complex that has a big heat pump. This is one of the ones we've worked on. And this heat pump, it's an Airmec brand, and it does domestic hot water and HVAC. So it's heating and cooling, and I just don't want to recommend that. I have a cautionary tale, which is that doing domestic hot water, it's a daily significant demand. Space heating is a seasonal specific big demand. You know, it's equal to domestic hot water and quite a bit more than the domestic hot water in the winter and the worst of the winter. And you end up having a missizing problem where you have a difficulty getting a heat pump that's efficient while also being extremely variable. It's difficult to get to pump systems that be extremely variable as you'd need for all these varying demands. And then you bring hot water back in, and it frequently ends up flushing through and disturbing the stack of hot water that's domestic hot water. And so you get this mixture of warm water that the heat pump doesn't do well with, like having water come in at 127 degrees Fahrenheit and it's supposed to be raised, pardon me, to 129, means your heat pump turns on, this huge heat pump, and then turns off. It's short cycles. So extremely complex, and I'm just not recommending it. We got this thing done, it works, etc. But it'd be a much better idea to make a domestic hot water heating system exclusively, right sized, the right efficiency. You know, plumbing water heater as well is complicated enough, believe me. And then it'd be better to have over on the heating and cooling side a heat pump that did both of those jobs. That's fine. does heating and then it does cooling. And this is hydronic, which I think is important because if you use refrigerant, that's usually a very high global warming potential chemical, and it leaks at a high rate. The best practices, you get 3% leakage out of all the systems installed in a year. Average practice is 10% of the systems will have a significant leak. Big systems, like for grocery stores, you'll have 50% of the refrigerant leak a year in volume. Half. And they top it off. All that refrigerant that runs underneath the floor to like cheese chillers and produce stations and all that kind of stuff. That refrigerant's nasty stuff and leaks a lot. So using water is a best practice, just so you know, whenever you can.
So can you, just to summarize, you're suggesting that instead of piping refrigerant everywhere, that you would heat it back where the water is, and then you have the water go, right?
Yeah, I mean, this talk is about heat pump boilers, right? And I'm trying to give a rationale of like why you wouldn't necessarily use a variable refrigerant flow, like a really big air to refrigerant heat pump that then delivers refrigerant all over a building. It's A, the most expensive way to do it. And then B, you have all these leaks and all the junctures as you send refrigerant all over the building. I'm recommending that you do this work with boilers, heat pump boilers, and send hot water around and cold water around. And I'll show some more tricks about how to control that with like do an air source heat pump at a low temperature of the water being delivered, and then have water source heat pumps for each apartment and such. This is for all different scales of buildings, our talk here, and boilers kind of go on the big side by definition. Yeah, ways we can do highly controllable, efficient, hot temperature delivery, like 180 Fahrenheit. This system doesn't get hotter than 130 unless you add water source heat pumps at the apartments. So, yeah, please.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Here's another one. This is using the Colmac. The last one was AirMac. And 4 stories, homeless housing in the garlic capital of the world, Gilroy, California. And it's got a nice swimming pool for the low-income senior citizens who are formerly homeless, some of whom have disabilities, and that's part of how they got homeless was injuries or mental disabilities. And now they're global. I was showing you that it really the best ones got innovated in Japan, and these are all just sites that have heat pump water heaters. Like I mentioned, actually these are all Colmac specifically because I was able to track down their installation spots. So Colmac built in Eastern Washington, good brand, among many great brands. Okay, now we're going to get more into the tech talk. I kind of gave you a little bit of history, a little bit of a overall review. Where has this been happening? Sort of a who, what, where. Now I want to talk about this stuff specifically. This is an industrial heat pump system, boiler style. And I'm not going to do any specific talks. This is a whole other grade of boiler than I think you guys signed up for. But just so you know, we have a whole guide on all the really big heat pumps that just look like tubes and pipes and such that fill up big rooms like this. There's nothing that needs gas. There's steam heat pumps if you need steam. There's high temperature heat pumps if you need to do breweries and sterilization, all that kind of stuff. And of course, electric resistance can back up or elevate temperatures that heat pumps, they max out at a given temperature. You can go from there with electric resistance, and that's still very efficient. Okay, so here's some examples. These are large. They're for cold climates. They sit outside. Arctic is well proven. It's a Canadian brand that goes to -15 and really maintains its temperature, does what it says it's supposed to do. Sorry, there's a little screen capture bubble there. I didn't notice until now. Ice Air, I think that's out of Canada also. Maybe it's like upstate New York. I forget. Apologies. But it goes to -13. The Nordic series, -7. There's Colmac. There you go. -4. And then there's more. Mitsubishi and Transom and Shark and Stiebel Eltron and Airmac and Chiltrex and Spaceback and more and more. So there's a cascading strategy that I wanted to show you. Colmac is helpful, as is Transom, I'll show you in a moment, in doing integrated designs where they start with a cold climate air source heat pump, and they'll raise the temperature of the water to, say, 80 degrees or 100 degrees. And then you take a water source heat pump that essentially just concentrates the heat, takes the 100-degree water and raises it to up to 180. That basic strategy, and you see those water source heat pumps, those are small. You can put that little box like next to an apartment and have that be the thing that heats the water for the radiator, and that way the person's radiator can be controlled. It's really important in retrofitting New York City. If you guys are interested in New York City, it's announced it's going to retrofit 600,000 public housing units, which all have boilers, radiator heat. It's going to retrofit, electrify them in the next 10 years. And there's other businesses that are trying to do that independent of the public housing, but that's a government commitment and it's already starting. And this is a classic strategy. Put some air source heat pumps up on the roof, raise the water to an appropriate temperature, 80, 100, 120, something like that. It's not for domestic hot water, it's for radiators. And then instead of cooking people the way that apartment complexes now are designed, you give everyone their own water source heat pump, with a temperature gauge on it, and then everyone can just heat their apartment as they wish instead of having everyone's windows open all winter long, which is how my sister lives with her family in New York City, and like on the 3rd floor, windows open all winter long so they don't just suffocate of heat.
But isn't that for ventilation, right?
Those systems were designed during the last plague, for real. Like the Spanish flu got people into thinking they need to overheat units and then get the windows open. But it's so there's some benefits to that, but it's they didn't have a good way of controlling who got heat in the radiators. They just try to heat the whole building, and so you get some places are very hot as you get further up in the building, and on the ground floor they're not that hot. So if you gave everyone a controllable radiator, they could still open their window and ventilate, no problem. Just they wouldn't have to just to survive though at all times. Yeah? Does that answer your question, Brett?
Oh, you couldn't see my face when I said it, but I was sort of laughing at that because the idea of opening your window to ventilate is a very unfortunate one that still goes around. But yeah, anyway.
I know. I thought it was just a bad design, and then I read about how actually it was an on-purpose design in response to so much disease in New York City. The people, they designed buildings so that they would have to keep the windows open, for real.
Right. Right, they didn't have their Energy Star bath fans back then, so or their ERVs yet.
So yeah, ventilation systems suck in those buildings. So that was.
Or they don't.
So we can do better though, and it's way more efficient, obviously, to give people control over their own heating and cooling. This is another example. This is coming into the US market. I just need to make the point that all these things have been in Japan, China, Eurasia generally for a long time. America, which has the lowest standards for electrical efficiency of heat pumps, and almost all housing is built to the federal minimum. Very little housing, unless there's a special funding source, gets built anything better than the federal minimum. And so the Japanese, the Chinese, the Italians, these are 3 centers of heat pump design. They've literally ignored the American market while they've developed in Southeast Asia and Australia and all over the place. We have gotten the dregs and we get it eventually. So here is Mitsubishi's. It's a good product. I don't mean to call it dregs. I'm just saying they get better. This is not like the highest efficiency available in Japan. So CO2, it has a 3.88 efficiency. In comparison, Sandin, that's a CO2 heat pump that's in the United States right now. That we've tested out as its boiler function at 4.5 on average over a year. This goes up to 175. Sandins don't, they go to 149. So this is perhaps sacrificing some efficiency by raising the temperature. It can go down to -13 Fahrenheit outside. Maintains 100% heating capacity at 26 Fahrenheit. It's connected so that it can be controlled by the grid. That's it's being sold into California because it can produce so much hot water. It can store all the demand between say 4 and 9 p.m. That's huge. That's when electricity is like 3 times as expensive. So they can shut off a huge energy demand and sort of provide grid benefits with this device because it's connected with the BMS system, BACnet. And it's big, 40 kW, nominal capacity. Here is a screen capture from a webinar that you can watch on Redwood Energy's YouTube sites. Okay, so if you go to Redwood Energy YouTube, you can find the transom presentation, Johan Martinson. And the question I'd asked him is, how do we go from -30 Fahrenheit down here, the coldest possible temperatures you'd see in the continental United States, other than something full-blown crazy freaky? But even that is full-blown crazy freaky. Because look here, this is the bin hours in blue in Buffalo, New York. This is the number of hours that you'd find at these various outside temperatures. So most of the winter hours are hovering around 30 degrees. But there's plenty that are down to 0, even -15. So it's like -30. So this yellow circle, this represents a refrigerant and represents a certain type of compressor that works all the way down to -30. And Johan's like, okay, this star here, I'm going to raise this temperature up to 80 Fahrenheit. That's what I'm going to do with this first air source heat pump. This one here, this is this hatch system. And they've done this a number of times, like school systems running on radiators. They'll put these big air source heat pumps outside. They might save money by putting less of them and putting some electric resistance backup in there. That's a trade-off, because they lose their capacity as it gets colder and colder. Electric resistance doesn't lose capacity. So maybe in order to get to -20, you put electric resistance, or maybe you put in more heat pumps. Your choice, depends upon your infrastructure and such. But anyway, so not too many cold hours, but even if you did, you take it up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and then this is a water source heat pump. It's loop of operable temperatures, right? Down here is ambient temperature outside. To the left, this is the leaving water temperature. So the yellow loop is the operating capacity of one type of heat pump, this one here, and then the black loop is this water source heat pump here, and you can raise it up to 180 Fahrenheit, even hotter. I mean, this isn't the only set of systems, it's just the one that they recommend, but you can get it up to like 195 with a CO2 heat pump, among others, and also with the compressor types, like inverter controlled scroll is a really high efficiency type scroll heat pump. So this is just to illustrate the packages that you're getting from heat pump manufacturers now to replace gas boilers at any operating temperatures you need that are like, normal. -30 up to 180 Fahrenheit, that pretty much does it all. Any questions here? Okay. Oh,
Nope.
go ahead. Okay. So this is an innovative, so Water Furnace, one of our sponsors, one of their former executives, he started a new heat pump company called Shark. It's not competing with Water Furnace. This is a wastewater heat pump. So this takes a chamber, like a big old vault of sewage, and it chills it. And it's got through heat exchangers, not directly. Chills it, takes this now hot refrigerant, and runs it through a boiler tank. And it's appropriate for domestic hot water and for lower temperature space heating, like 130, 140. So that works with fan coils, but it doesn't work with a radiator. You'd have to add electric resistance to get it up to the radiator temperature, or a water source heat pump. It just doesn't come with that. It's the domestic hot water boiler type. But Shark, it's huge. It's going into big buildings, that are doing radiant floors. It's perfect for radiant floors. So, train stations and libraries and things like that. It's a quickly growing business up in Canada, and taking sort of the best thinking of how ground source heat pumps work and applying it to sewage. Here we have Sanco. It would used to be called Sandin. It's now American owned. And over on the left-hand side, this is an example of how they're using this sitting tub scale. So this is a 1.3 ton heat pump, not that big. And then they're ganged up in series here, which is nice because not all of them need to turn on. They have variable capacity that way to turn on more as you need more heating. And this is how lots and lots and lots and lots of apartment buildings are being either built or retrofitted. Because they're the most efficient, they need the least amount of electricity. And when you have a limited amount of electricity in a building, it's terrific to use the most efficient heat pump to get the job done. So you don't have to provide new electrical supply. It's important. Over on the right-hand side, you can see some of their operating deals here. So like at 5 degrees Fahrenheit, it's still perfectly producing its hot water, but then it drops off. And here's its COP, at a 4.5, staying terrific. We just find these things that in apartment complexes are great. They need the Colmac controls. Sandco hasn't put out their own controls, so we're using Colmacs to bring them on, take them off as the hot water demand goes up and down, or the temperature changes. Colder in the winter. So here's an example for an apartment complex, a basic idea with boilers. Okay, so this is a temperature maintenance heat pump. Its job is to just go from 110 to 120 Fahrenheit, and this is the big loop for the whole building. Hot water coming at 110, it gets heated up either with an electric resistance element or with a heat pump dedicated to just that small temperature difference. It's dialed into that. It's kind of a tough job for heat pumps to do, so not tough, it's a specialty job. And then out goes the hot water. Okay, over here, this is where the heat's coming from. You might have an electric resistance backup tank. It's good to have resiliency, so you can afford the extra capacity. And then you have these are the Mitsubishi ones. You might have multiples of them, really big building. And out comes the 170 degree Fahrenheit hot water. And there's cold water going to it. And then you take that hot water off and you dump it into this called the swing tank, where you do a lot of mixing and perfect temperature balancing. A lot of work goes into making this the right temperature for the apartments and this the right temperature for the machines. This is where the machines work really well, doing a high temperature lift, and then you mix it. There's electronic mixing valve. So this is sort of like a best practices design. And if EcoTope has the EcoSizer, for any of you who are interested in doing this design work on the domestic hot water side, all the utilities in California paid EcoTope like $500,000 to do an amazing job, and it is a terrific tool. Using all of their 55 field installations of monitored of central heat pumps up in the Seattle area. So they got tons of field data in there. It's just a terrific online free tool with simple drop downs and such to help you size the heat pump, including if you want to do thermal storage for like grid battery, extra water heater tanks, that kind of thing. Avoid electric resistance and such because you have more storage. So it's called the EcoSizer. Say it again, the EcoSizer. And Brett, if you could put that into the chat, I'd really appreciate it. EcoTope's EcoSizer.
Sure.
Thanks. Okay, here's another great example, a little case study if you think about these boilers. This is in Philadelphia. It's called Front Flats. You're seeing it's covered in solar panels on all sides. There's a rooftop garden that's underneath these translucent solar panels. So it's sort of like a grid of light up there. Very pretty. Plants grow underneath it. And this architect, contractor, and realtor brothers team, those three guys, they developed this and many other buildings that are really our most advanced examples of zero energy design in the country, onion flats. So what they have here is just best practices. They have simple heat pumps raised to 140 Fahrenheit, right at the top of what their heat pump does. And then they're taking two of them and doing what's called pipe and pipe recirculation, where the water comes out and it goes up in an insulated pipe and it branches off to each of the floors. And at the top, it just loops all the way around and comes right back down in the same pipe. So it doesn't do a big loop around the building. There's just stacks of them underneath stacks of wet walls in the apartments above. So like 4 bathroom, kitchen wet walls above them will be served by these 2 tanks. So they've got 160 gallons of storage and then 2 compressors. Those are 5,500 BTU per hour compressors. And they're down in the basement. So they're kind of doing a ground source heat pump through the air of sorts. Best practices, really inexpensive, very stable, easy to take this tank out and replace it with a different one. The bigger the system, the more complicated it is, the harder it is to maintain, the more difficult it is to deal with when it fails. So you have to make some choices. This is scaled for a 4-story tall apartment complex with these wet walls, and it's and it's passive house construction, et cetera. I could go on and on. It's just best practices everywhere you look there.
This is water heating only?
Water heating only. It's a domestic hot water boiler. Boiler being defined as like a lot of volume of hot water for either domestic hot water or space heating, and this is doing that for an apartment complex. And it can go for radiant floors too. These types can do that. They're not really designed perfectly for it, but they do it. Here's best practices if you have one of these central boilers, this is an apartment complex we worked on, where we're delivering copper, not PEX, delivering copper in individual pipes off a manifold and 3/8 inch piping, except for bathtubs that get 3/4 inch because of the water volume that goes through. And so we're able to have these 2 tanks over here delivering to all these apartments over here through just little skinny pipes so they get their water within 30 seconds. And we really tried hard to make it match the standard of water sense, the EPA's water sense program. They've got delivery standards, so this is designed with that in mind. And so best practices, and it's not just us doing this, other people, this is essentially Gary Klein helping me understand how to do skinny pipes. And ta-da, it gets done now. Here's another person doing skinny pipes with Gary. This is Pete. And Pete Singer is working on Solara up in Rotterdam. He owns the PV array and solar thermal systems, and he owns the exterior heat pumps. And he's the one who's tested out a bunch of them and found that the Arctic was his most dependable at really cold temperatures, at producing its rated heat as opposed to having its performance decline. It's designed for snow country. And he's doing these little skinny pipes off of big central tanks. So he does a heat pump in the winter, solar thermal in the summer, and a little bit of electric resistance to top it off, and he has these big storage tanks downstairs. He works as a utility, like a PPA utility. And I think that's not a very efficient design. I personally think that getting a variable capacity heat pump and running it year-round off the PV array is the cheapest, most stable way, because he's out there a fair amount tweaking valves and such to incorporate 3 different heating systems, which he sort of considered the most efficient, but not the most cost-effective, not the easiest either. Okay, that is the end of the boiler talk. I want to pause there before I go into a little bit on retrofits. Any questions?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of conversation going on here. I wonder if it would be helpful to kind of remind everyone when, briefly what the importance is when you mention CO2 refrigerant.
Oh, CO2. So CO2 is one of many refrigerants, but it is at the very lowest end. CO2 has got a COP, or a global warming potential of 1. That's important. Refrigerants can be very bad chemicals. Propane's got a global warming potential of 3. That's awesome. But we don't get much propane in the U.S. because of UL listings and blah, 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 fire risks and such. But other refrigerants don't go as cold very well. They can, like R410A, that's in HVAC systems, that goes down to -30. So does CO2. So those are comparable, but the global warming potential of R410A is like in the 1200 to 800 range, 1800 range, so it's not the best. So you don't need to have a CO2 heat pump. It is not like you can't get other things that do a similar job. The most important distinction is it's really efficient at like a 4.5 COP. Its efficiency is top notch. Doesn't get better than carbon dioxide. And except wastewater heat pumps, those are pretty good. But anyway, actually CO2 is still the superior, most efficient, most power conserving, which can be an issue in design, power conserving device.
So I hear a lot of folks using these CO2 devices, and they're going to start a radiant project with it for heating, and then nothing ever comes of it. But it sounds like you've actually got success with that.
Well, that's another problem with CO2 is that it really wants cold water to come in. You can design it for radiant systems, but it wants to do a lift from, say, like 40 degrees Fahrenheit up to 140 Fahrenheit. And that would be a happy place for CO2 to do a 100-degree lift. If you ask it to do radiant floor heating, you're asking it to do a lift of 10 degrees. And that makes it very inefficient. It hates that. You want to have a different type of heat pump and refrigerant and such to do small lifts. So it's not really designed for recirculating for floors, for radiant floors very well. It's just fine for radiators, right? Higher temperatures is what I'd like to do, and I'd like to do it. it would be best for the first lift, and then at a certain temperature, take it off of a water source. I'm going to get too deep into the weeds on this. So I'll just say that the CO2 is not ideal for radiant floors, and other refrigerants and systems are better.
Do you see it coming out for any just traditional air source heat pumps, or being able to replace our 410A when it needs to be, charged up again, I guess?
Well, people have hooked them up to like fan coil systems and such. Mm-hmm. So you can do or baseboard heating and such. Mm-hmm. There are ways of using what the hot water that comes out of a CO2 heat pump is. It's just radiant floors or even radiant floors, you could do it. It just means you have to be very careful in cooling off the water when it comes back. So Harvest is a company in the Bay Area that's trying to do that, and they're thinking next calendar year they'll have a product that a whole system that's designed to sort of go in and do all these. There's thousands and thousands of radiant floor homes that are old in the Bay Area that they're going to try to work on. So it's not that it's impossible. People are trying.
Mm-hmm. Question here. What type of heat pump is best for a low temperature lift?
You're looking for a heat pump that does a little bit of heating for a recirculating system. If you're asking from air outside to low temperature lift for radiant floors, so that's one, as opposed to some sort of two-step stage. Just a one-step stage. Then the answer would be something like the Arctic. Mm-hmm. That's an air. Let's see, do I have any others? Here we go. These are all products that are good examples. Steve Leltron, Arctic, Space Pack, this Mitsubishi, but really the Space Pack would be a terrific. So would the Arctic. These are ones I have experience with, I should say. I haven't used this Mitsubishi or the Steve Leltron, so I can't say up or down. But these, I know both of them are high performance. Chiltrex is another that is great for radiant floors and lower temperature lifts. And they're using 410A, and they're just doing air to water, and they're all controlled and designed to support radiant floors. That's their groove. That's where they live.
Any guidance on water to water versus air to water choices?
The water to water, there's a bunch of them out there, and I would, like, here's a water to water from Mitsubishi, the CAHV. That's for that low temperature maintenance that goes with the Mitsubishi QAHV. Mm-hmm. Water to water, well, this is a water source heat pump that Transom does, where it's taking this 80-degree Fahrenheit water and lifting it up to, say, 180. Mm-hmm. So that'd be an example. If you were trying to do like a well water furnace, one of your sponsors, that's a ground source heat pump that can go straight into water, like that illustration you showed at the beginning, doing a little advertisement for them. And so water furnace and other ground source heat pumps would be appropriate for that kind of water to water, like water out of a bay, water out of a lake, water out of a well.
Great.
Okay. So if you go to our roadenergy.tech research, you can find our booklets on how to do single family, multifamily, commercial, all electric construction. We have a cold climate one for Michigan coming out that's not published up there on the booklet. And we don't have this one up yet. It's getting published next week online. This is our pocket guide to home electrification retrofits. So this is the part of the talk where I explain how to electrify your home. And this is my house. The gas leak was right here. This is a house in Cleveland, Ohio. And here's like a cool old-fashioned induction range if you want like a beautiful, expensive one as opposed to sort of a modern-looking one. Here's what fireplaces can look like. You use ultrasound mist, and then you light it with LEDs, and you have a heating element. So you can put it anywhere. You can stick your hands in it. It doesn't light you on fire. It's nice that way. Really convincing. In many ways more convincing than a natural gas flame, which to me just looks like someone is cooking their food inside of there. I grew up on wood heat in Wisconsin, so I just hold gas stoves in contempt. So and then this, a NeoCharge smart circuit splitter. This is where you can combine a dryer with, say, a car charger, So over here on the right-hand side, I'm showing you, this is the panel amps at 240 volts counted. So counted means there's discount rates for different devices where you say, oh, this is a 20 amp device, but it is actually counted as 8 amps because it has a 60% discount. That's how the National Electrical Code works. So the National Electrical Code discounts most devices off of what you actually have to provide capacity for in a panel. You have like a 100 amp panel. That's a common thing, 100 amp panel. But you want to electrify everything. How do you do it? Well, you could get a plug-in or portable heat pump. Show you that. That uses hardly any power, just uses what's in the wall. You get a ductless heat pump. Doesn't have as much power because it doesn't blow as hard through a fan, like for duct work. This is an inverter drive high COP heat pump that is for ducted though. Pardon me. This is like a ducted type. So you are using more energy, even when it's high efficiency compared to a mini split. That's good efficiency. And then what happens if you add resistance because you didn't get a good inverter controlled heat pump, or you just want a resistance? You can see it like boom, huge power demand. Okay, same thing with water heaters. Proterra, Rheem is our sponsor there. In April, they're coming out with a 120 volt heat pump water heater, so that it can plug into any outlet in your house. That doesn't use much power. They have also their half amp Stiebel Eltron 2 and Rheem. They both offer 15 amp ones, less electric resistance backup versus their 30 amp models, more electric resistance backup. Okay, so these are your options for power conserving, so you can stay on a 100 amp panel. If you do a combined range, that doesn't use nearly as much energy as 1 to 2 wall ovens. And note that a built-in microwave can have more power supply to it even, but countertops, not so much. So this is around the oven range. Pardon me, this is for ovens. You have a range that uses power, period. It'll be like a 40 amp circuit. But where does the oven go? If it's combined with the range, it doesn't use much power. If it's separate, it uses a lot of power. Okay, let's sort of explain the difference between also countertop microwaves and built-in microwaves. Built-in microwaves need to have, by code, capacity in the box if it's built into the wall versus on the counter. So these are your oven options. Now laundry. I have a combined washer dryer, condensing washer dryer. It can plug into any outlet, which I did. It plugged into a 120 volt outlet, and now I have 30 amps available for a car charger, which is awesome. Condensing dryers, they're like 240 volts. They use more. They need a dedicated circuit. Heat pump dryers use more. They often have like a resistance backup built into the heat pump dryer, and then a true resistance dryer. So you can see why I got a combined washer dryer to replace my resistance dryer to free up power for car charging. And here you can see how much power a 6 mile per hour charger, like this is how many miles you can charge on it. You can see as you go up to, like Tesla fast charging. Oh, pardon me. And the last one, these circuit splitters, like this NeoCharge here, these devices that you can use to balance like your car charger and your dryer or your water heater and your stove and etc. So you can reduce the power demand of any given appliance by kind of half. These are just visual examples. This is my condensing washer dryer. This is the heat pump, although I have the Rheem one that's going into my house. It's getting installed next week or so, the retrofit one. I'm experimenting with it. These are 120 volt plug-in heat pumps to do about a ton of heating, and they just have 2 ducts that go through the wall as opposed to cutting the whole thing in the wall. And then this is the mini split type, 120 volt, really power efficient. They go up to 18,000 BTUs per hour, down to like -4, 15, etc. So you can get a ton and a half of heating with the mini split, and it does the most heating because it has the biggest fan. Here's the examples of smart circuit splitters. There's different types that are various amounts of smart. And if you're interested in this watt diet calculator, whoopsie, you can find it once again where the booklets are as well. You can download our spreadsheet on how to, it's got lots of pull downs and instructions and such. So you can become a consultant in electrifying yourself. And it's just the National Electrical Code. built into an Excel spreadsheet. So this would be an example, and we're almost done, just, questions of the last one here. This is how you could do a 100 amp home with 2,000 square foot house. This is, we use the watt diet calculator, quote unquote, the hybrid heat pump dryer, combined cooktop and oven. So then over here, 3,000 square foot house on the same 100 amp panel, and we're using 2 of those circuit sharers. That's how we're getting that job done in an even bigger house. So that's your marching instructions. There's nothing technically limiting us from electrifying every house out there that's got a 100 amp panel. Less than 100 amps, it needs to be a pretty small house to pull it off, but it's certainly possible, on a 60 amp panel. But you have to be very power efficient, and it should be a smaller home. Okay, that is the presentation. Thank you all for your attention. And now, if you have any questions, I'm still here. Turn off my video.
Yeah. I'm still here. Yeah. So yeah, real quick before we get to those questions, because there are a lot of questions coming in. I want to just make sure that you know that you should check your inbox for the survey. And if you don't see it, make sure to check your spam. The survey will also pop up right after we close out, and you can take it then. For those of you who want to get your Con Ed in the future, go to the YouTube channel link on our when you click on it, and then on the left there, click Show More, and then on the right, click Need CEUs. You can get the quiz and take your CEU quiz. Again, that's only for people watching this in the future on demand. And a huge thanks to our board of directors, our volunteers, our new executive director, and all of our top tier sponsors: Mitsubishi Electric, Beam, Build, Equinox, Serve, helping you achieve all electric net zero energy. So yeah, going back to the meter, and you did disappear for some reason, Sean. But going back to the meter there, or I'm sorry, the power box. My brain is scrambled, but there's a better term for it. But what you were just talking about, the electric box. I mean, really, what is the barrier if you need to add like an addition to it? Is it really a huge cost barrier?
If you're going from a 100 amp panel to a 200 amp panel, you're probably getting a new service line delivered to your house, a new thicker wire off the power pole, and that can trigger a variety of expenses. Like the wire itself might be free from the utility, but you're going to have to upgrade the service panel that it comes to, and you have to replace your circuit breaker panel as well. And you might find that your old house is no longer in compliance with the current setback rules the utility has, which only get enforced if you make them pay attention to you. And so you might have to move your weather tower. These are all things that happen to me. I spent thousands of dollars going from a 100 amp panel to a 200 amp panel, and these things are $500, and like, or 300 or 200. Like they are affordable, and so it's just a cheaper way of avoiding what could be kind of an expensive upgrade to your whole system. It's just, it's basically like a plug strip for 240 volt.
So those are doing new construction, I mean, they could foresee this if they're not they should be putting in all electric, but if they're not, they could at least pre-design for this pretty easily, right?
Yeah, and keep in mind though that transformers for subdivisions and apartment complexes come in certain sizes that can get progressively more expensive, like both the device and the installation strategy and the set space back and all kinds of stuff. So if you can avoid asking for more power, it's usually cost effective. So you wouldn't use these circuit sharers in new construction, but you would use power efficiency. I do that all the time in apartment complex design, bring in smaller heat pumps or more efficient heat pumps so that we don't have to get as big of a transformer, or we have more power for the electric car charging stations.
There's a lot of questions coming in. I guess, what are your thoughts overall on, transition strategies such as, retrofitting in my case, I'm saying dual fuel systems, but someone here actually was pointing out there are actual heat pump powered natural gas powered heat pumps, which I'm not too familiar with, but either one, it sounds like there's some sort of natural gas stuff going on behind the scenes to, get you through the anxiety, especially of winter, for those who are concerned about that.
Yeah. Well, let me speak to that briefly. There are no heat pump water heaters on the market for sale. That is something that's been funded over and over and over and over to benefit gas utilities who want to stay relevant. But they have a COP of 1.2, the experimental ones that are not for sale, as opposed to these, which have COPs of 3.6 to 4.5. So they're very low efficiency. They're dangerous. You have essentially a gas generator running on top of your water heater. So, don't put that in a basement unless you want to die. Like these are serious pollution creators. And they're noisy. It's a generator. Yeah, and it's a heat pump. So you have, they're not going anywhere. They get presented every year at the Hot Water Forum. And I'm sorry I'm being as blunt as I can be, but I am no longer interested in this product type. It is, even just the delivery of natural gas to the device doubles its climate change impact. Just that, the 3% leak that's out there in the grid, it is expensive, it doesn't exist, it's not efficient. If you're running it at all, you're doing a disaster to the environment with methane leakage. What's not to hate? So, yeah, they exist, sort of, but they're worth ignoring. We need to move forward with higher efficiency heat pumps, period. And because even the methane delivery system is as big of a problem as the combustion at the highest efficiency you can do.
So sometimes, and actually I just literally got an email about this today from someone, but this idea of using solar hot water to power our water heaters versus just using PV with a heat pump water heater.
Yeah.
In general, what is your take on that?
Well, heat pump water heaters are solar thermal water heaters. They're just the most advanced form of it. So break down, what is a solar thermal heater or water heater? It's a panel that has a heat exchange surface. sunshine goes into the little tubes and it turns into radiant heat. It's interacting with refrigerant called propylene glycol. So it's a refrigerant that doesn't go through phase change, which is like boiling. Basically, it doesn't boil. As a consequence, it doesn't store massive amounts of heat. The way that a heat pump does boil its refrigerant, it has the ability to store huge amounts of heat in the phase change moment between liquid and gas. So once you get this still liquid refrigerant that's not that hot down to your water tank, you have a heat exchanger. An air source heat pump pulls in the warm air, even in the wintertime. It's been warmed by the planet, by the sun. And then it has a heat exchange surface that's been chilled by refrigerant and the compression cycle. So it does a really efficient job of pulling the heat out of the air. And that refrigerant then is pumped and it goes through phase change. So it boils and then condenses to drop its heat into the water. And you have a solar thermal collector. It's just compressed and it's using an optimized refrigerant, but it is not a different technology. It is doing this exact same work with the exact same available solar heated ambient air heat, and it works at night, and it works in the wintertime. It works at any hour. So it's just an idealized solar thermal collector. And then you pair it with PV, and the electricity, when you have a solar thermal collector, if you have waste water, it doesn't go anywhere. You don't use it, then it just chills off. Electricity, everything uses electricity. If you have more than you can use, it goes back into the grid. There's no waste. So it is kind of optimal to use the PV electricity, and then your optimized heat pump water heater, solar thermal water heater, so to speak, gets to use it when it wants to. And otherwise, electricity is available for other things. So there's just no waste and very efficient.
Yeah, one of the last projects we were involved in on the certification a long time ago, I remember they were having a lot of concern. They were reporting about overproducing hot water from their solar thermal and what to do with it. So every time I get that question, my short answer is think of it this way, PV, if you overproduce, you get a check. Hot water, if you overproduce, you get a problem. So what do you want to deal with, right? You want a check or a problem? So, but yeah, thanks for breaking it down. One of our passive house builders here, here's a pretty in-depth question comment. Hopefully you have some ideas. We have a European ASCO washer that uses a tiny trickle of 240 volt. It'd be great if we could share a circuit with either our 240 Zender ERV or our 240 induction cooktop or 240 oven. Is it illegal to use an auto circuit sharing device in new construction?
It is not illegal, to my knowledge. These are UL listed, right? So you're allowed to use them. The real trick is, does the code require you to deliver dedicated electricity to your stove and to your dryer and to your washing machine? And the code encourages you, and many code officials will try to make you do it. But in fact, dedicated circuits are not code mandated for most appliances. They're code, like, you don't need to have a dedicated circuit for your refrigerator, yet people usually do that, as an example. But so you need to go a little bit into the code to find out if you're required to deliver electricity to every one of your devices. And if you're not, then you make the plugs that are required, and then you put in a circuit share and you share it, because that's code allowed. And I apologize, I haven't done that work, but I'll get that work done to make sure I can answer that question better next time, like exactly which appliances you're required to. But yeah,
can't catch them all. Speaking of that, we're staying on the electrical panel side. There was a question: how does the circuit splitter work? Does it prevent both items attached from working at the same time?
So different ones do a different job. So the simple switch, you can just use one or the other. It's a simple switch. The EV power share, not a simple switch. You can operate both devices at the same time. Your electric vehicle charger, you can have two cars going at the same time charging it, for instance. The NeoCharge, which is really designed for sharing between appliances, that will run both the car charger and the dryer at the same time if neither of them are together exceeding the 30 amps. Like, but if they are exceeding 30 amps together, it has a plug that is the dominant plug and one that is sort of the submissive plug, the one that turns off. So you might turn off your water heater for 15 minutes while your car charger is doing its last bit of work. You might turn off your car charger if you're trying to get your laundry dried. Laundry dries for an hour or something, but you have the car charger on all night. So hey, whatever, just waits a little while. I actually have one of these in my hand. NeoCharge sent me one, in case anyone's looking at the video. There's one plug, there's two plugs. It says primary and secondary. That's their language for it. So, and then the Dryer Buddy. This is really designed for a car charger and a dryer. And there's more. These isn't even all of them. There's others that will, like the NCC9, I think it's called. That will allow your car to charge until I think it's 80% of the panel capacity has been reached, and then it'll turn off your car charger. And most of the time, you don't have 80% of your capacity of your panel being done. But it basically it doesn't even show up on your panel, because it's designed to only take up to 80% of the capacity. So that's a legit use of a panel. And just, all these devices are in this book that will be up there in a week or so, which is our retrofit guide. And you're welcome to correspond with me if you want an advanced copy of that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks.
Brett, you have an advanced copy. If you could send it out.
It says draft on it, so I was afraid to share it with anyone.
It's draft. Don't reshare this, everybody. This is just draft. But we're about to get we're doing all of our peer reviews, and like a dozen people read it and find our typos and tell us add this kind of thing. So this isn't the perfect version that comes out in a week, but you're welcome to it, because it has almost everything, and excuse typos and things.
Great. Yeah, I'll kick it out. So, there's a lot of cases on existing buildings, whether they be multifamily or single-family homes, where I believe that there may be trade-offs now on where you invest. So, we've always been told, weatherization, air sealing, insulation first. But are there cases where maybe it is better to just swap out and go straight to the heat pump and work on mechanicals, water heating, where it could save energy, save money, or is it still really the best practice to go after the air sealing and insulation first in a majority of cases?
Well, I think that, okay, so it depends how comfortable you want to be. I've come to think of air sealing more as a comfort measure as opposed to a necessity of electrifying. Yes, having a leaky house and a heat pump means you might have to have twice as much heat pump to meet your peak loads. When it's really cold outside and your house is leaky, then you might need to have like electric resistance backup to accomplish that. But it's hard to insulate and airtight in people's homes, and people need to electrify immediately, like already. It has to happen. Personal story, my mother-in-law died in the Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa in 2017. That's the big climate change induced fires that we all track in California at the beginning of what is now called fire season, which didn't exist before. There wasn't a fire season until 2017. So it's like we need to electrify now. And I would say, yeah, you should just go out and electrify everything, period. Throw in the air sealing if you can get it done at the same time. But I don't think it's first. I think the first thing to do is get rid of your gas stove, because it is causing smog in your kitchen within 20 minutes of cooking, actual smog. And it causes cancer because it's the #1 source of formaldehyde in your life. And specifically, little kids and pets get cancer off of gas stoves. It probably caused my wife and I's premature birth of our twins because nitrogen dioxide, which we were using the gas stove to heat our little apartment, stupidly. And we had, an early birth of our twins, which is what gas stoves do. And yeah, it's really bad for you. It, doubles your use of heart attack medication if you already have heart symptoms. Being the chef over a gas stove, you'll have to take twice as much medication, deal with the carbon monoxide and the nitrogen dioxide that you're inhaling, which both trigger heart attacks. It causes asthma. About 1 in 8 cases of asthma are caused by a gas stove in the house. Start there, but do as much as you can, because that's your personal health. Like, get that gas stove out. Get a true induction $140 2-burner countertop induction range. Just plug it in and start cooking with that. True induction is the one I like the most. I've tested all the cheapo countertop induction ranges. Eurodib is good too, but it's noisier. But a true induction is for me a thumbs up recommendation. Go find your own. So that wasn't quite the answer you're looking for, I think, Brett, but that's the answer I wanted to give.
Well, no, I mean it is. I mean, just sharing. Again, sometimes we have these trade-offs. We can't do everything, and
Right.
where is it more important? And I think as you'd mentioned, air sealing is a comfort thing, right? And stopping air from moving through our walls is a health issue.
Yep.
It's not just energy, but so is electrifying. It is as much a health issue as it is an energy issue, if not more. And so I think you gave a perfect answer. So I appreciate it.
People should air seal. It will reduce the power demand of your HVAC system, which is important for electrifying. But if you have enough power, you should electrify your space heating system immediately. People's homes and buildings are causing as much air pollution as all the cars. Those two are equivalent amounts of air pollution. Not the diesel trucks and such. That's a whole another level of bad air pollution. But that's only about 10% of vehicles are that terrible, terrible version. But 90% of vehicles, which are cars and light-duty trucks, are causing just as much air pollution as people's buildings. And so we need to dig in on this one.
So when considering a project, whether it's new homes or existing homes, there's a question on here, and I'm going to kind of just give you my first personal answer to this question. But the trade-off or the consideration, okay, you're sold on heat pumps. Of course, we've got ground or air and water, right, to choose from. And as we can see, the 26% tax credit was recently renewed on ground source heat pump, giving them the edge that they had recently lost, because it was gone. And actually still a lot of people, even people who work in geo, don't even know that it's been renewed. I know it just happened. There's a lot that's happening, so it's hard to keep up.
COVID cliffhanger law at the new year. Yeah.
Yeah, I just got chucked in there. So
Got its 26%. too. Yep.
Yeah. So solar and solar is renewed too, of course. But I looked at my own house when we were looking at geo versus ground source or air source heat pump ducted systems. And we first of all, I would have had to have killed a lot of trees just to get the most efficiency out of the geo to run it, lengthwise. I could have bored it down, but it costs a lot more money. But we ran the energy models, several different ones using Home Energy Score and HERS, and could only come up with about 1,000 kilowatt hours for the whole year of savings going to geo, which sounds like a lot, but when you put that money into solar, it's super cheap. But that was the trade-off, like more solar or less solar and some geo. So that was our decision that we came to on my specific project. But what are you seeing out there? Are you seeing that these air source heat pump systems are now getting competitive?
Yes, they are competitive. It's a past tense thing. They have been competitive. And no longer should people choose ground source heat pumps as their go-to. Because, yeah, your point is well made that there is more efficiency in a ground source heat pump during the very depths of winter. But 1,000 kilowatt hours is what 2/3 of 1 kilowatt up on the roof makes. So 50 square feet is the amount of solar panels. Like 2 sheets of plywood is 64 square feet. So like 2 sheets of plywood, a little bit less. That's the amount of solar that is 1 kilowatt, and 1,000 kilowatt hours is made by 2/3 of that over the course of a year. That's not much solar up on the roof. 1 kilowatt, people usually put like 5 to 10 kilowatts up on the roof. So 2/3 of one to go from a really expensive HVAC system to an inexpensive HVAC system, a cold climate, inverter controlled air source heat pump, very cost effective. Yeah. I mean, in price and comparison, when I was trying to do that in apartments, ground source heat pumps were in the $15,000 to $20,000 per apartment range just to put the ground source in. And the equivalent was like $8,000 to put in the air source heat pumps, exclusive of the duct work and such, just the heat pumps. So it was, and getting a special truck there and all the rest of it, it was, we went with air source heat pumps, and that was a lesson I learned in 2006. Like, oh, these heat pump things, these are great. Back when they were even just like single speed with electric resistance backup, I was like, well, it's kind of a mild climate where we are, so we don't need a fancy big ground source heat pump for wintertime. And now the heat pumps are amazing. The wintertime performance is just perfect.
Are you seeing any ducted mini splits being used in existing projects at all?
Yeah, so like the city council member of Berkeley who proposed the gas ban, just before she did that, her furnace failed, and so I helped her, and she wanted a ducted mini split. So it's like the upright compressor as opposed to the big cube. It's more of the horizontal, like this LG, right? So something like that. I think she used Mitsubishi, whatever. And then the refrigerant line went into a little fan coil box, small, and then they ducted off of it. And she loved it. First, she's like, it's so quiet. That really surprised her because furnaces turn on and off, they short cycle, and a heat pump you just leave on and it's at a very low fan speed. So you never really hear the fan. And it's just quiet and warm. She's like, oh, it's not always like hot and cold. It's just warm. She loved it. And then she's like, let's ban gas, which they did. Like 42 other cities in California since July of 2019. It's one every 2 weeks. Seattle also just did it with their new construction code for mid-rise and commercial buildings. And Salt Lake City's looking at that, New York City, and it's spreading around the country as a municipal action because gas can be dangerous. So the health and safety code, you can point at and say, this is really not safe or healthy. We should stop permitting gas piping. It's just like we stop permitting, gas lighting. That's how people used to light their homes with gas lighting. That's not allowed because it's dangerous. It's the same thing. Or like why we ban cigarettes inside of restaurants, or why we require fire sprinklers. That's a municipal level code that you can implement, or you can just ban gas piping is not safe, not healthy, and that's what cities are allowed to do. So
yeah, we see a lot of in the existing homes we test leaking gas pipes on the inside. Even after a brand new gas furnace install, we test anyway, and sure enough, there's leaks all over the place. And yeah, it's just crazy to see. I obviously, once the infrastructure is in there, it can be difficult to justify the swap. But I mean, on a new construction side, I assume not having the gas pipes can be an easy line item to remove, right, and justify any additional costs.
Well, it lowers cost. I mean, all buildings are built all electric to start off with. Electricity is delivered to every appliance, period. And then you add gas piping. You didn't ever need to add gas piping because electricity would work for any electric version, like, right? But you already build electric wiring to everything. So you can operate the clocks and the fans and the pumps and the ignition switches, and then you add the price of gas. So yeah, study after study has shown that it lowers like cost by $3,000 per apartment, $8,000 per house. That's why California code is moving towards not permitting gas and heavily discouraging, because it's societally and personally more expensive to build that way. And it's why, since 1950, the majority of water heating, since 1950, the majority of space heating systems have been electric. Since 1970, the majority of water heating, new construction is built electric. And then right now, 62% of stoves are electric that are sold every year, and 88% of laundry dryers are electric. And the movement is really taking place mostly in the south of the United States, because before there were computer-controlled heat pumps, they didn't work that well below freezing. So you needed to put them in warm climates. So not so much Michigan, right? We didn't see the movement in the Midwest, but 4 in 10 homes in the United States are built in the South. So if they're doing like 60% all electric construction and we don't see it, it doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Right. Well, we are at the end of our time. This has been a great conversation. And I guess just real quick, where can people go to contact you for more information, or when they're ready to start their project, where can they go grab your brand new electric retrofit pocket guide?
Yeah, I want to get to where's my, go to this page. There it is. Roadenergy.tech. I don't think I have my email address here anywhere, but it's Sean at Redwood Energy. Oopsie, show my screen. Sean at redwoodenergy.net or .tech, both of them get there. And if you send out my slide deck and maybe my contact information, my email, I'm more than happy to help people out. And
yeah,
rapidly electrify.
Great, Sean. It was great to have you. Thanks for doing this last minute. Good to have you back. I'm sure we'll have you on again for something else here in the future. So.
People want to retrofit their homes, I'd happily make that the whole talk, and we can just dig right into it all. So
yeah, maybe with later on in the year once we get through the guide. So, well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you again, Sean. And again, just stay well, stay safe out there. We love doing webinars. We're going to always do them, but we do want to get back in person again. So we hope that you can help us beat this thing. Stay in when you can, stay masked when you can. There is new variants spreading that are much more contagious and potentially may reinfect. So watch out there as we try to get through this and get to the summer. We know that building science can help us too. We can ventilate, we can filter, we can use UV, we can use humidification, and we can use it to not only prevent COVID spread, but to make our buildings better in the future. So I hope you'll join us in getting the word out about that. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Be sure to check out all of our courses available online that you can watch anytime and anywhere to pick up your CEUs. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube to get weekly updates and stay up to date on green building science courses, webinars, and home tours. Thanks again.